This video is in part going to be a memory game of trying to remember what any of these books are about. Hi, I'm Nikki Starr, welcome back to my channel. If you don't know, I am an aspiring author, and as part of that I get told often that I need to be reading a lot. And a few years ago I was reading maybe 2 or 3 books a year, and now with the pandemic I have been reading a lot more. I have made it a point to read a lot more. So what I thought I'd do today is break down what books got the highest rating from me last year. So hopefully I can get an idea of the kind of books that I actually enjoy and maybe why, and see if I can see some patterns, but also just to share and just to have a fun little video. I'm hoping that editing Nikki is going to be able to put things in this section here. Otherwise it's going to look very strange that I'm slightly off center, so I apologise. So first I'm going to do a little bit of a scroll through and hopefully I will put up some of these graphs here. I use the StoryGraph to track my reading. If you haven't used StoryGraph before and you currently use GoodReads, you can, if you wanted to, switch over and they make it really, really easy to import. I think I imported somewhere in 2020. I had all my GoodReads stuff and I imported it all over and it went pretty flawlessly. There was a couple of bits I had to do some tweaking on, but for the most part it was just a couple of minutes and it's done. And what they do for you is that they give you a load of graphs. I'm going to give some of the stats from my 2021 reading in general before we get to the books. So I read 50 books this year. The moods of them. So I have a lot of adventurous, emotional and dark books. That sounds right. That sounds like me. I do love a dark book. I like gritty. I like grimdark in a lot of ways. I like a lot of death and destruction in my books, so I can understand that happening. I tend to favour medium-paced books, which again makes sense. Something that's really slow-paced really tends to grind on me. And also sometimes fast-paced books can be too fast. You can be really enjoying yourself but not investing in the characters as much. So a nice medium book tends to be my sweet spot. So again, not surprised by that. I'm also not surprised that I favour shorter books. As I said, this end of the year I've been basically just trying to read books for the reading goal, which is not the ideal solution, and picking shorter books to do it. My fiction non-fiction split is about a quarter non-fiction, which again I think makes sense. A couple of years ago you wouldn't have catch me reading a non-fiction book, but with the Libby app which I use, which allows me access to library books in audio form, which has been an absolute game changer. I will reach more for a non-fiction book if I can do it in audio form, because for some reason I retain a lot more of what I'm talking about in the kind of spoken format rather than a written one. And then we have the genres. Young adult and fantasy, top of the list, which makes a lot of sense for me. Those are the categories that I traditionally have written in. I am moving a little bit away from young adult, but I do love reading a young adult book. And then it kind of splits it out for the rest of it, but there's quite a few genres in there. I don't know if I'm going to fit them all on here. I do have a dystopian book in here, which I don't remember. Oh, High Rise by J.G. Ballard. I put that in. I watched the film with Tom Hiddleston and I really wanted to read the book too, so again I got it on audio and it was read by him and I had a whale of a time. And then something that StoryGraph started doing this year was giving you format. Now, I have tried my best to put this accurately, but it relies on the system having the right additions for certain things. There have been a couple of occasions where I've not been able to put down the right format, but in general this is right. 84% of my reading came from audiobooks. Not a surprise at all. I love putting an audiobook on and like tidying the house, or putting an audiobook on when I'm cooking, or the days that I've gone into the office over the last few months when we've been allowed to. I have an hour and a half one-way commute, so audiobooks have become quite a good staple for getting me through that and back. So for shorter books I can get through kind of a whole book in that day, which is quite interesting. And then most read authors. After the Shadow and Bone series came out on Netflix, I've already read, I read the first of Shadow and Bone before the TV came out, and I'd read both of the Six of Crows books because I loved them so much. But when the series came out, I decided that I wanted to go through and reread the first Shadow of Bone book and finish the next 2 because I never got all the way through. And I also found a book they published which was kind of stories about the saints in the world, which is very exciting. So those were the 4 books that I read that were Leigh Bardugo specific. It also doesn't surprise me that Casey McQuiston is on that list because I'm pretty sure both of these books are red, white and royal blue. I listened to it the first time at the beginning of 2020 and I listened to it twice last year and obviously twice this year. So it's becoming quite a staple in my reading. And then this is the graph where you can see not only how the last 6 months has gone, but how many pages have happened. Unsurprisingly, very little happened in November because I was writing my arse off. Started strong at the beginning of the year, and then by May or June, very much staying in kind of a flat situation, dipping for November. That is kind of how this looks. And then we have the star ratings. So before StoryGraph, I only ever did the whole numbers. I do now do 0.25s and 5s and 0.75s. The highest category is still the 5-star books. I don't know if it's because I am a pushover. I rated 8 books 5 stars this year. So let's break that down and have a look. I don't know if these are ordered in the order that I read them. I feel like they might be. No, they're not. They're not. It doesn't appear to be in a particular order to these. I'm just going to go through them. I gave both Beartown and Us Against You by Frederick Buckman as 5 stars. For both of them. Those 2 books are based in a very small town. I think it's in like, I want to say, and this could be wrong, I want to say in like the American Midwest. You spend a lot of time in a lot of different people's heads in the town. You are getting an idea of what this kind of small town feels like. And then there is a particular plot line that could be triggering for some people, but there is an assault that is done on one of the girls in the town. And there's a lot of fallout in terms of who sides where, who blames who, for want of a better way of wording it. And it really explores that. So if it's something you think you can handle, depending on what your personal circumstances are, it's very interesting to be in so many different heads while these things are happening and get an idea of how that comes across. Very, very interesting. If you think you've got the capacity for something like that, Frederick Buckman's writing is amazing, and I will be following up with as many of his other books as possible. But it's very down to earth, but also quite poetic. I very, very much enjoyed it, and I will be following up with a lot more of his work. Next one I've got on the list is Becoming by Michelle Obama. This is one of the few non-fiction books that I've read this year. I am not usually a big autobiography kind of person, but there is just something about Michelle Obama that I have always watched in awe of. Reading this book has really solidified a lot of that for me, like going through her progression, things that she's done both before she was in the White House and when she was in the White House, the kind of actions she's taken is amazing. She's an inspirational person, and I wanted to read more kind of inspirational books with women in there and like empowering books, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book a lot. One of the other ones that I gave a 5-star this year was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have a feeling that most people, if you're on YouTube and you watch any kind of book content, you are aware of this writer. I absolutely adored the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo last year, and this Daisy Jones and the Six, for someone who did a music degree and spent some time during that music degree looking at like Fleetwood Mac and the fallout of having relationships inside of your band, or just the idea of having any kind of disagreement when your life and livelihood is so closely tied to these other people. I very much enjoyed this. I have read a couple when I was younger of like YA versions of this with like a band that makes it big, but this is kind of told in, if I remember correctly, like interview styles. People are kind of talking it through, and I listened to the audiobook which had a different audio narrator for every one of the characters, and it just felt like I was listening to a documentary. I also really desperately want to hear this music, and it will never exist because they were just talking about it so vividly, and I was like, I just want to listen to the whole album. I want to hear what they made, but they're fictional characters. I got very invested. Of course, Red, White and Royal Blue is on the list. I have listened to this way too many times now. It's becoming a comfort read. For someone who spent a long time convincing myself that I didn't in any way enjoy romance books, this one had me in a chokehold when I read it for the first time. There is a way that these particular characters are written for me that really, they felt so realistic and so flawed in that realism. I thoroughly enjoy every second of it. And again, I listened to it on the audiobook. If you don't know what this is about and you've not seen any of the hype, it's about the first son of the American president, one of the princes of England, and the complications that ensue from that. It is very heartwarming. It is funny. The characters are really fleshed out. The supporting characters are really, really fleshed out. I've seen some criticisms for the ending not necessarily being satisfying, but I feel like all of the loose ends that are started in the book get completely tied up, and we just get the warm fuzzy feeling at the end, which is what I am going into a romance for. I am in a romance book for the warm fuzzy ending feelings, if I'm honest. So I thoroughly enjoy this book, and I will be rereading it a number of times, I'm sure, in the future. One of the other books that I gave a 5-star was The House in the Cerulean Sea. Again, I've seen a lot of stuff online for this. I'm a very new person to consistently reading, so I'm picking up a lot of the hyped books, I feel. I adored this. I really did. All the characters are really fleshed out. The premise is essentially that there is a system designed for taking magical children who don't have parents and sort of setting up orphanages or little schools for them. The people governing these bodies, they send one of their workers to go to a particular orphanage, basically to report back what's happening, and he's there to observe the kids, and he ends up spending a lot of time with them. It is amazing. I love it so much. We'll probably end up rereading this, and I don't know if the writer has done any other ones since, but I'm going to be looking out for them because I enjoyed this a lot. There's 2 more on my list. So the next one is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Again, this is a reread for me. I read this in 2018, maybe 2019, and there is just something so wonderful about the way that this is written. It essentially is designed to kind of go through her journey, having done Eat, Pray, Love and kind of the fallout afterwards, but also just talking about how creativity works and trying to get a grasp on how inspiration hits you and how it works and how you can capitalize on certain elements of it. I always do it in audiobook form because it's read by her, and for me, if I'm going to do a non-fiction book, having it read by the author just makes that it elevates it, and I can't explain why. But again, she talks it through in a very down-to-earth way. There are some I think if I remember correctly, there are some points that you could see as kind of like a spiritualness to it, so very worth knowing that going in. I find with a lot of self-help books, I have to go in with the kind of idea of take what works for you and leave what doesn't. There are always going to be some things in these kind of books that maybe tread a line for you where you go, actually, I'm not going to take that advice. Never going into it going, this is going to be 100% the book that turns everything in my life around. But it is a fantastic book for really feeling that creative energy. And I always read it and then immediately have a burst of creative stuff the next 2 weeks. And then the last book, which I probably shouldn't end on this because it's a little bit sadder, is They Both Die at the End, Adam Silvera. The title gives you a decent amount of the stuff, but to give you a little bit of context, if you haven't seen this book, I feel like I'm just listing really hyped books because I'm very new to anything book related. But there is essentially a system where they ring you up on the day that you're going to die, and they tell you that you've got the rest of the next, or the day before. I think they give you as much notice as they can. But essentially everyone has this, and the world is set up to acknowledge that this happens. So what happens is we have 2 characters' point of view that we flip between, and they both wake up that day and find out that they are getting this message to say that they are going to die today. And it's about their journey. They don't know each other at the beginning. It's about the journey of accepting that fact and still trying to live through that, which is a very interesting thing for a book to tackle. I don't think it happens very often in many of the books that I read or that I hear about. This idea of accepting and acknowledging a guaranteed death. It's quite heavy if you are in a situation where you don't think you could deal with this. Absolutely makes a lot of sense. If you've got any unresolved grief feelings, it will find them. It will find them and bring them forward and make them a problem for you. It is a beautifully written book. I fell in love with both of the main characters immensely. There's a lot of seeing the perspective in terms of people outside of them and their sort of surrounding groups, and there's a lot around the idea of how this knowledge hits the person it is directed at, but also how that falls out on the people around them. And it's a very well written book in my opinion. So those are my 5-star books for this year. I'm hoping next year to get a few more. I feel like now I've got a better grip on my writing taste after having done 50 books this year. So I'm hoping to do this again next year, but with more on there. And hopefully Red, White and Royal Blue will still be there, but I can skip past. Having seen the kind of books that I give 5 stars to, if you have any recommendations, please leave them in the comments below. Let me know what your favourite books this year have been. Has there been like a standout top book of the year, the kind of book you'd go back to multiple times, or just a kind of book that's kind of stayed with you and you can't quite let go of yet? But all of that to say, as always, thank you so much for watching. I've been Nikki Starr and I will see you in the next one.